Lisa and I were a power couple. At least, that's how we liked to think of ourselves. She ran a thriving consulting firm, and I owned a rapidly growing tech startup. Together, we had built an empire, one where strategy wasn't just for business, but for life itself. In our world, power was everything. Networking events, high-stakes negotiations, luxurious galas, we moved through them like a perfectly rehearsed dance. She was poised, charming, a natural at reading people. I was sharp, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. We were unstoppable. At least, that's what I thought. The first cracks in our perfect facade didn't appear as an argument or cold distance. No, they came in whispers, stray comments from colleagues, the way Lisa's phone screen would dim the moment I walked by, the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne on her silk blouses. At first, I ignored it. We were busy people, constantly moving in different directions. It was easy to explain away the inconsistencies, to tell myself that suspicion was just a symptom of stress. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was an ordinary evening. Lisa had just returned from a weekend business retreat, and I had spent the past few days drowning in work, preparing for a major acquisition deal. She greeted me with the same effortless smile she always wore, kissed me on the cheek, and poured herself a glass of wine. "How was the retreat?" I asked casually, my eyes flicking to the suitcase she had yet to unpack. "Exhausting," she sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Workshops all day, networking all night." She took a slow sip of wine, her fingers toying with the stem of the glass. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. Too smooth. Later that night, when she was in the shower, I did something I had never done before. I checked her phone. It was locked, of course, but Lisa had never changed her passcode. A minor oversight, one of many mistakes she didn't realize she was making. And then, there it was. A string of messages from him. Jason Reynolds, CEO of Titan Tech. My biggest competitor. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through their exchanges. The messages weren't just flirtatious, they were explicit, detailed, and worse, they weren't just about sex. Lisa had been feeding him information. My information. I set the phone down carefully, my hands steady despite the hurricane inside me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was business. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was helping to dismantle everything I had built. I could have confronted her that night. Demanded answers, screamed, broken something. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled when she came to bed, kissed her goodnight, and whispered, "I love you." Because Lisa had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and I was about to make her regret it. From the moment I put her phone back on the nightstand, I knew I had 2 choices: act on impulse and lose the upper hand, or play the long game and make her fall into her own trap. I chose the long game. The next morning, Lisa moved around the kitchen like nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, made her usual smoothie, and checked emails on her tablet as if she hadn't just shattered everything between us. If I hadn't seen the messages myself, I might have believed her. "Busy day ahead?" she asked, glancing up from her screen. "Very," I said, sipping my coffee. "Big negotiations coming up." I watched her carefully, waiting for a flicker of something: guilt, hesitation, even fear, but Lisa was too well trained for that. She simply smiled. "I know you'll kill it," she said, reaching across the counter to squeeze my hand. The irony nearly made me laugh. She thought she was playing me, but she had no idea I was already rewriting the rules of the game. That day, I started gathering evidence. Not just the texts, but everything: the timestamps on her messages, her company's financial records, her firm's meeting schedules. If she was feeding Jason information, I needed proof beyond a doubt. I also needed to know how deep this went. So, I tested her. That afternoon, I sent Lisa a text while she was in a client meeting. They moved the acquisition timeline up. Need to move fast before the market gets wind. Minutes later, she responded, "Lisa, wow, that's huge. When did this happen?" Not even 10 minutes after that, my contacts inside Titan Tech, anonymous sources who had no idea they were feeding me intel, reported unusual activity. Jason had started making calls. She was working fast. Too fast. By the time Lisa came home that night, I was calm. I played my part perfectly, acting like the devoted husband, the oblivious fool. She wrapped her arms around me in the doorway, pressing her lips to mine. I let her. I needed her to believe I knew nothing. "You seem relaxed," she murmured. "Must have been a good day." I smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It was productive. She had no idea. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage. Lisa had put a knife in my back. Now, I was going to twist it. By now, I knew two things for certain. Lisa was sleeping with Jason Reynolds, and she was leaking my company's confidential information to him. What I didn't know, yet, was why. Was it just about sex? The thrill of betrayal? Or was there something bigger at play? I needed to find out before I made my next move. So, I did what Lisa never expected. I let her win. The next morning, I told her I was taking a few days off work. I've been pushing too hard lately, I said, rubbing my temple as if the stress had finally caught up to me. I need a break. Lisa's reaction was subtle, but I caught the momentary flicker of unease in her expression. A break? She repeated, stirring her coffee. I nodded. Yeah, just a couple of days. I'll still check in, but I need to clear my head before this deal goes through. That was all she needed to hear. She smiled, reached across the table, and squeezed my hand. That's a great idea. You deserve it. She had no idea I was about to use those days off to dismantle everything she and Jason had planned. While Lisa thought I was lounging around the house, I was meeting with my legal team. The thing about running a tech startup is that your intellectual property is everything. And Lisa? She had underestimated just how airtight my contracts were. I had a clause in my company's employee agreements, a strict NDA that covered business partners and spouses who had access to confidential information. Breaching it didn't just mean divorce. It meant legal consequences. I sat across from my lawyer, David, as he reviewed the case. This is bad, he muttered, flipping through the printouts of Lisa's messages. She's not just cheating on you, she's committing corporate espionage. I leaned back in my chair. I know. He let out a low whistle. If Titan Tech acts on any of this insider information, the SEC will be all over them. You could take Jason Reynolds down with her. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's exactly what I plan to do. David nodded. So, what's the next move? I took a deep breath. I'm going to feed her a lie. One big enough to destroy them both. That night, I acted as if nothing had changed. Lisa and I had dinner, talked about her day, even watched a show together on the couch. She nestled against me like she always did, completely unaware that I was already setting her up. Afterward, when she went to take a shower, I left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, an open invitation. The message I sent to my CFO was right there, in plain sight. Me. I ran the numbers again. If we delay the acquisition by 3 months, we can triple our valuation. We just have to make sure no one leaks it. I knew Lisa wouldn't be able to resist. She was predictable. And the moment she took the bait, I would have everything I needed to take her down. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for Lisa to take the bait. I left my phone on the counter, accidentally unlocked, and went upstairs to shower. I took my time, giving her plenty of opportunity. When I came back down, towel draped over my shoulders, I saw exactly what I expected, Lisa standing by the sink, her phone in her hand. I was flicking between my screen and her own. She was texting someone. She looked up when she heard me enter, her face a picture of forced casualness. Hey, she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. Hey, I replied smoothly, acting as if I hadn't just caught her in the act. You need something? No, just checking an email. Lie. I smiled, stepping closer, brushing a damp hand along her waist as I leaned in to kiss her cheek. You work too hard, I murmured. She laughed softly, as if she wasn't actively helping my enemy burn my empire to the ground. That night, Lisa slept soundly beside me, completely unaware that she had just sealed her fate. Because the second she texted Jason Reynolds, she wasn't just guilty of cheating anymore, she had committed a crime. The next day, my sources inside Titan Tech confirmed that Jason had received the information. Not only had he received it, but he had acted on it. Titan Tech was already adjusting its own acquisition strategy to take advantage of my delay, shifting millions of dollars in anticipation. Jason thought he had inside knowledge. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. Lisa thought she was untouchable. They were both about to learn just how wrong they were. I made my next move. That morning, I sent an anonymous tip to the SEC, providing detailed records of Titan Tech's suspicious trading activity. Insider trading was a federal offense. If Jason's company acted on Lisa's leak, they'd be investigated, and Lisa would be implicated right along with him. It was only a matter of time. That night, Lisa and I went to a gala, a high-profile charity event where every major player in our industry would be. We arrived hand in hand, the perfect power couple, smiling for cameras, sipping champagne, laughing with CEOs and investors. I could feel Lisa's confidence radiating off her. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger. She had no idea she was already falling. Then I saw him. Jason Reynolds. He was across the room, surrounded by executives, grinning like a man who thought he had won. Our eyes met, and for a split second, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. Good. Lisa, oblivious, leaned in and whispered, "I should go say hi." I let her go. I watched as she crossed the room, as Jason put his hand on the small of her back, as they exchanged looks that should have belonged to us. And all I felt was satisfaction, because I knew what was coming. Lisa and Jason had played their game. Now it was my turn. Lisa and Jason stood together across the gala floor, their heads close, whispering like co-conspirators. They thought they were untouchable, that they had outmaneuvered me. They had no idea the walls were already closing in. I sipped my champagne, watching, waiting. Timing was everything. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my lawyer, David. David, SEC just launched a preliminary investigation into Titan Tech. Jason's stock activity is raising red flags. It's happening. I smiled. Right on schedule. Lisa returned to my side, slipping her hand into mine as if nothing had changed. Jason says he's got something big coming up, she murmured, her voice carrying that subtle excitement she used to reserve for me. I'm sure he does, I replied smoothly, raising my glass to my lips. She had no idea I had just set fire to everything she had built with him. The next morning, the fallout began. News broke that the SEC had initiated a probe into Titan Tech's financial dealings. By noon, their stock had taken a hit. By evening, whispers of insider trading were circulating through every major business channel. And Jason? He was panicking. Lisa had no clue. She spent the day as if it were any other. Conference calls, client meetings, perfectly curated social media posts. She was still playing her role, oblivious to the fact that the floor beneath her was crumbling. Then, that evening, she got the call. I watched from across the room as her phone buzzed. I knew who it was before she even answered. Jason. She stepped away, pressing the phone to her ear. Hey, wait, slow down. What? What do you mean an investigation? Her body stiffened. Her free hand curled into a fist. That's impossible. No one knew. And then, it hit her. She turned to me, her face draining of color. I just smiled. Realization crashed over her in waves. I knew. I had always known. She hurried to end the call, forcing calm into her voice, but her eyes were wild with panic. What's wrong? I asked, feigning concern. She swallowed hard. It's nothing. Just a work thing. Lie. I set my glass down, tilting my head slightly. You look worried. Anything I can help with? She forced a smile, but I could see it, the cracks forming. No, she said too quickly. I've got it handled. She didn't. She was already losing control. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. Lisa paced the living room, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Jason had called twice more in the past hour. Each time, her voice had become sharper, more desperate. I sat back in my chair, watching, savoring. Calm down, she hissed into the phone. Nobody can prove anything. That was where she was wrong. The SEC probe wasn't just noise. It was a slow, inevitable avalanche, and Jason was scrambling to escape. But there was no way out. The moment he acted on my fake information, he made himself a target. And Lisa? She was tied to him, whether she realized it or not. She ended the call, throwing her phone onto the couch. Her hands were shaking. I gave it a beat before I spoke. Bad day. She turned to me, her expression carefully neutral. Just business complications. I nodded, swirling my drink. Jason seemed stressed. Lisa's breath caught. Just a fraction of a second. Just enough. She recovered quickly. You know Jason, always overreacting. I set my glass down. Must be tough for him, dealing with an SEC investigation. Silence. Lisa stared at me, her pupils dilating just slightly. Fight or flight. She knew. She finally knew. You, her voice faltered. You knew? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, meeting her gaze with cold amusement. Of course I knew. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I saw it all play out in her mind. The missed signs, the false sense of control, the moment she walked straight into my trap. And then, anger. You set me up, she whispered, her voice shaking. I stood, adjusting my cufflinks. No, Lisa. You set yourself up. I just made sure you fell in the right direction. She let out a hollow laugh, running a hand through her hair. This isn't over. Jason has powerful lawyers, and I. A sharp knock at the door cut her off. Right on time. Lisa turned, her face pale as she realized what was happening. I walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. Two men in dark suits stood there, flashing their credentials. Lisa Carter, one of them asked, stepping forward. Lisa took a step back, shaking her head. No, this is a mistake. This is a federal investigation, ma'am. We have some questions for you. I watched as Lisa's world collapsed in real time. Her perfect strategy, her affair, her carefully built empire, shattered. She turned to me, desperation creeping into her voice. You did this to me. I smiled. No, Lisa. You did this to yourself. As the agent stepped inside, I reached for the divorce papers sitting on the table. It was time to end this. Lisa's face was a mask of disbelief as the federal agent stepped into our home. She had spent years calculating every move, manipulating every situation to her advantage. And now, for the first time, she had no control. I could see the panic in her eyes, the frantic way her mind raced for an escape route. But there wasn't one. Ma'am, we need you to come with us for questioning, one of the agents said, his voice firm but professional. Lisa turned to me, desperation flashing across her face. You can fix this, she whispered, stepping closer. Tell them you made a mistake. That this is all a misunderstanding. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. There's no mistake, Lisa. She blinked, her lips parting slightly. You'd really do this to me? I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You did this to yourself the moment you climbed into Jason's bed. Her breath hitched, and for the first time in years, I saw something in Lisa I had never seen before. Fear. The agent stepped forward. Ma'am. Lisa swallowed hard, forcing herself to regain composure. She straightened her shoulders, tilting her chin up with the last remnants of her defiance. I'll have my lawyer deal with this. They let her out, and I followed them to the door, watching as she was escorted into a sleek black car. Just before she got in, she turned back to me one last time, her eyes burning with something between hatred and disbelief. I didn't look away. Then, the door closed, and she was gone. The house was eerily silent after they left. I walked back inside, pouring myself a drink, staring at the divorce papers I had set out earlier. I had waited for this moment, for the final, undeniable victory. So why did I feel nothing? For years, Lisa and I had been a team. We had built everything together. Our careers, our reputations, the empire we had ruled over like royalty. And yet, in the end, all it had taken was a single betrayal to turn us into enemies. The love? That had died long ago. I took a slow sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. Jason Reynolds would be next. Lisa was only the first to fall. Lisa was out of the picture, for now. But this wasn't just about her. Jason Reynolds had played his part in this betrayal, and I wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. By morning, the business world was buzzing. News of the SEC investigation into Titan Tech had spread like wildfire. The whispers turned into headlines, and Jason's empire, his reputation, was cracking under the pressure. I spent the morning making calls, playing the role of the concerned industry leader. It's a shame, I told an investor over coffee. Titan Tech was positioned for major growth. But insider trading? That's not something the market forgives. I wasn't the only one having these conversations. By noon, Titan Tech's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Investors were pulling out. Jason's name was being dragged through the mud. And then, the inevitable happened. Jason called me. His number flashed on my screen, and I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Jason, what the hell did you do? His voice was raw with fury, with panic. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. I have no idea what you're talking about. Bullshit, he snapped. The SEC is breathing down my neck. The board is in chaos. And Lisa, he stopped himself. I waited a beat. What about Lisa? Silence. Then, more controlled, he said, we both know you set this up. You fed her false information. You wanted me to act on it. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the moment. You made that choice all on your own, Jason. You son of a... Careful, I interrupted smoothly. Threatening me won't change the fact that your own greed got you here. Jason exhaled sharply, trying to rein in his temper. We can fix this, he said, shifting tactics. We can work something out. I have contacts. I laughed. A low, genuine laugh. You still don't get it, do you? What? This isn't about fixing anything, Jason. I let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. This is about watching you burn. The line went dead. I sat back, satisfied. Jason had played his last card, and he had lost. By the end of the day, the Titan Tech Board made their decision. Jason Reynolds was forced to resign. His company was crumbling. His investors were fleeing. The SEC probe would drag on for months, maybe years. Even if he avoided prison, his career was over. And Lisa? She was radioactive now. No firm would touch her after being linked to a federal investigation. Her business was as good as dead. I had taken everything from them. Now, all that was left was to walk away. The world outside was falling apart for Lisa and Jason. The SEC probe was growing, Titan Tech was in freefall, and Lisa's consulting firm, her legacy, was bleeding clients by the hour. But inside my home, there was only silence. Lisa hadn't come back since the agents took her in for questioning. She hadn't called, hadn't texted. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. I sat at the dining table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me. For years, this marriage had been a merger, a partnership built on power and strategy. We had climbed to the top together. And when that wasn't enough for her, she had tried to climb higher, without me. Now, she had nothing. I took my pen and signed my name with steady, deliberate strokes. By the time she saw these papers, Lisa wouldn't have a leg to stand on. No alimony. No stake in my company. No golden parachute to soften her fall. She had gambled everything. And she had lost. That evening, as if summoned by fate, Lisa finally called. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Then I picked up, but I didn't speak. She hesitated on the other end. Then, in a quiet, broken voice, she said, "You really did it." I swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light. "Yes," I said simply. A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "Did you ever love me?" The question hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I saw us as we once were two ambitious kids who had built something incredible together. Late nights, whispered dreams, shared victories. And yet, all of it had led here. I exhaled slowly. I loved the idea of us. Lisa didn't answer. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she just wanted to hear it out loud. Finally, she took a breath and said, "Where do we go from here?" I glanced down at the divorce papers. "You'll find out soon enough." Then, I hung up. 2 days after our last conversation, Lisa showed up at the house. I had expected a fight. Screaming, accusations, maybe even tears. But when I opened the door, she just stood there, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her sharp confidence was gone. Her tailored power suits had been replaced by something simpler, jeans, a blouse, no jewelry. Lisa Carter, the woman who once held boardrooms in the palm of her hand, now just looked lost. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I considered saying no. I should have. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering attachment to the woman I used to know, made me step aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the place, as if she barely recognized it. Maybe she didn't. Maybe this house had only ever been a battlefield to her. Her gaze landed on the dining table, where the divorce papers sat waiting. She swallowed hard. "You're really going through with it?" I crossed my arms. "Of course I am." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. "I don't have anything left, you know?" "I know." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I thought I could win. That Jason and I, she cut herself off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter anymore." "No," I said coldly. "It doesn't." She let out a slow, shuddering breath. "I was wrong," she admitted. "About everything." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Lisa reached for the divorce papers, flipping through the pages. I watched as she scanned the terms, how cleanly I had cut her out, how little she was leaving with. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Then, without another word, she signed her name. It was done. Lisa set the pen down and finally looked up at me. "Do you hate me?" I met her gaze, searching for the answer within myself. After everything she had done, after every betrayal, every lie, every knife in my back, did I hate her? "No," I said finally. "I don't." She blinked, surprised. "But I don't forgive you either." Lisa nodded, accepting that. Maybe it was all she could ask for. She stepped back, hesitating for just a second. "Goodbye, then." And for the first time in years, Lisa walked away from me without looking back. I didn't watch her go. I just poured myself a drink, sat down, and stared at the divorce papers. It was over. And yet, it felt less like victory and more like emptiness. The morning after Lisa left for good, I woke up to silence. No sound of her heels clicking across the floor. No distant hum of her phone vibrating with early business calls. No scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. Just silence. I sat up, rubbing my face, expecting to feel some sense of triumph. I had one. I had taken her down, dismantled her lies, made her pay for every betrayal. But as I looked around the house we had built together, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. And I didn't know if that was a victory or a punishment. I spent the next few days closing the final chapter of my marriage. Lisa's name was removed from our joint accounts. The legal teams handled the last formalities of our divorce. The house, once a symbol of our shared ambition, felt more like an empty shell. And Jason? His downfall was swift and merciless. His resignation from Titan Tech had triggered an avalanche. Shareholders fled. His credibility was in ruins. And the SEC wasn't finished with him yet. Last I heard, he was trying to cut a deal, throwing every possible scapegoat under the bus, including Lisa. It was poetic, really. She had risked everything for him, only for him to discard her the moment the walls caved in. I should have felt satisfied. And maybe a part of me did. But another part? Another part of me felt like I had spent so much time planning my revenge that I hadn't stopped to consider what came after. One evening, I found myself at a bar, not the high-end kind Lisa and I used to frequent, but a quiet, dimly lit place with no expectations. I sat at the counter, nursing a whiskey, lost in thought. Then, a voice broke through the haze. Long day. I turned to see a woman sitting a few seats away, swirling a glass of red wine. She wasn't dressed to impress, wasn't trying too hard. Just effortless, natural. The kind of woman Lisa never was. I gave a small smirk. Long year. She raised her glass slightly. To surviving it, then. I hesitated, then clinked my glass against hers. To surviving. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think about something other than revenge. Maybe, just maybe, the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about winning or losing. Maybe it would just be mine. The divorce was finalized a week later. Lisa signed the papers without contest. No fights. No last-minute negotiations. Just silence. I didn't see her again after that. I didn't need to. Our story had ended exactly as it should have, her stripped of everything she had tried to steal, and me walking away with my empire intact. Jason's fate was worse. Titan Tech never recovered from the scandal. Their stock plummeted, investors fled, and within months, the company was acquired at a fraction of its former value. Jason lost everything, his job, his credibility, his power. He tried to reach out once. A late-night email with a pathetic attempt at justification. I didn't reply. I had wasted enough time on them. I sold the house. Not because I needed to, but because it no longer felt like mine. Every wall, every piece of furniture carried the ghost of a past I no longer wanted. So, I packed my things and left. Bought a new place, smaller, quieter, just for me. No more grand spaces designed for appearances. Just something real. For the first time in years, I wasn't strategizing my next move. I was just living. One night, I went back to that quiet bar. She was there again, the woman from before. This time, she slid into the seat next to mine without hesitation. So, did you survive the year? I chuckled, taking a sip of my drink. Barely. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Good. That means you're still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I really was. Lisa and Jason were nothing more than a closed chapter. And me? I was finally free. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.